It's time for
On the Victory Homefront
with Jamie. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of On the Victory Homefront. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about where I spent my last weekend, which happened to be at the World War II WASP Museum in Sweetwater, Texas. We're also going to be talking about unpreparedness, kind of in correlation with what I just saw in the news not too long ago with blackouts. And all throughout the podcast, I'm probably going to be mentioning, I'm sure I'm going to be mentioning what all is going on in my home front in correlation to these things. But let's start off with the World War II WASP Homecoming weekend. So not only was it the homecoming weekend, which is something they do every year, but it was also the 20th anniversary of the WASP Museum. If you are a World War II enthusiast, such as myself, then the World War II WASP Museum is definitely a must-see, and I recommend putting it on your bucket list. The World War II WASP Museum is at Avenger Field. That is the home of the WASP during World War II. Now, you may be asking, well, who are the WASP? The WASP are the Women's Airforce Service Pilots. These incredible women stepped up to the plate to relieve men to go to war. And what they did is they ferried planes from one location to another. And it was a big deal because it was ways to get planes where they needed to be. Now, most pilots in the Army Air Corps or in the Army Air Force, they were trained on 3, correct me if I'm wrong, but a number of planes. The women in the WASP were trained to fly every single plane because it was their job, it was their duty to move every single type of plane. Now, in addition to ferrying these planes all over the United States, they did other things as well. They would also help train pilots, and they were also, believe it or not, this is crazy, they were moving targets for target practice. They would literally have a target trailing behind them as they're flying around in the sky, and other pilots would be shooting at them. Not the WASP. This is the Army Air Corps and the Army Air Force. They would be shooting at these WASP, what's behind them, and that was a way for them to train shooting moving targets. When the call went out for the WASP to be formed, about 25,000 women answered the call. However, only just over 1,200 were able to go into the classes because you had to pass the classes and you had to have a certain amount of flying hours. And then of that 1,200, just over 1,000 are the only ones that passed. The program started in 1942 and it lasted until the end of 1944. At the end of 1944, just like the women who went to the factories, they were told to go home. These women were considered civilians, which is crazy to me, but at the time that they were. And even so, while they were there, they had to pay their rent. They didn't get military pay, and they didn't get military rights. So when the WASP was disbanded, they just went home and they were just to go on to their normal lives. They were not given any recognition. As a matter of fact, it was almost like they had even been forgotten that they had existed. It wasn't until I was just hearing this weekend, and I can't remember the exact day, but it was a big to-do when they were allowing women to fly planes in the Air Force. And they made this big announcement, like, these are the first women to ever fly military aircraft. And the WASP were like, excuse us, no, we were. And so the WASP was starting to be brought to light. It was during Obama's presidency that they finally received the full recognition and received the gold medal. Now, you might think, well, these women just ferried planes. They probably weren't in any real danger. Well, the fact of the matter is over 30 WASP died in service to their country during World War II flying these planes. And they were not given military burial. And there is a really fascinating book out by Erin Miller. And the book is called Final Flight, Final Fight. And this was about her grandmother, who was a WASP, who wanted to be buried in Arlington National Cemetery. And basically, she was told flat out no. And Erin, her granddaughter, actually fought hard. And I'm happy to say that the WASP have received full military recognition, and her grandmother was able to be buried in Arlington National Cemetery. If you've not read the book, I highly recommend it. And there are several more books I can definitely recommend. I'm going to put in below in the informational for this podcast. Now, I'm sure there are going to be a lot more than what I am personally mentioning, but these are the ones that I have been told are phenomenal. I actually have in my library. I admit I have to read all of them, which is in my plans. It's in my goals to read all these books that I have. Again, I was very lucky to meet Erin Miller, and she is at the homecoming every weekend, signing her book and speaking to all the attendees about her grandmother and about the WASP. So definitely check it out. So a little bit more about the homecoming weekend itself. I have been going to the homecoming since about, I think it was about 2018 or 2019 was the first time that I went out to one of the WASP homecoming weekends. It was the first one I attended, as I just said. And I had not stayed for the whole weekend, those first couple of years that I went. The event seems to have expanded, that at least according to my recollection, it has. I would go out there and we would spend time during the dinner. The dinner is every Friday evening, and it is one of their biggest fundraisers for the weekend because the weekend itself is free, but there are certain events like the dinner that it's called like the rendezvous, the homecoming rendezvous, I believe. Rendezvous Under the Stars. Oh my goodness. I am just talking without actually doing my research. But that is Friday night. And so I had gone out to a couple of the dinners, and then that was the full extent that I had my first 2 years of going to the homecoming weekend. Now when I go out there, I actually spend the whole weekend out there. I'm there on Fridays evenings for the dinner, and then which I am very honored to help out with my friends. And then we spend all day Saturday at the museum. Saturday's open to the public. It is free. And the museum is actually 2 hangars worth. So they've got one hangar set up where it's just a sitting area. They've got food trucks outside. And then right outside that hangar, which is the original hangar to the WASP, by the way, you can go down to the airfield and see the planes. And then the second hangar is where a lot of the artifacts currently are. And thank goodness it is climate controlled, because there's one thing I learned about going out in Sweetwater, Texas. It is hot, it is humid, and it is very, very windy, at least most of the time. This last weekend, the temperature was really, really nice, a little rainy, a little cloudy, but it was pleasant otherwise. The wind was still there, though. I have never been out there where it hasn't been windy. But again, it was very nice. So in the second hangar, I cannot say enough about it. There is so many artifacts in there. It is so well done that I think you can spend all day in there and you would still miss bits and pieces of it. They did a tremendous job setting up different exhibits, and they're always bringing out new stories. So they showcase certain WASP every year, and they bring out stories. And then during homecoming, a lot of these families come and they speak on their moms, on their grandmothers, or even on their fathers who were flight instructors at Sweetwater. And so it is a really great weekend. Again, if you're really into World War II and the history during that time, visiting the World War II WASP Museum in Sweetwater, Texas should definitely be on your bucket list. And I do love Sweetwater is a really cute little town, and I think you would just really, really enjoy it. And let me just tell you, some of the neighboring towns, such as Abilene, you can't go wrong with doing a little vintage shopping if you're into that. I mean, I don't argue about that at all. But that is something else that you can do as well. So again, it was a great weekend. I really soaked it in this time around. Not that I don't soak it in otherwise, but because I know now I'm moving out of state, I'm not sure if I'll be able to make future homecomings. My plan is to, but I'm just not sure. So I was talking out to all the families. I picked up my cookbook. There's a WASP cookbook because in the second hangar, there is a gift shop. So it's a must go to, you guys. The gift shop has some of the most incredible products in there. I always buy a shirt every time I'm out there. I got to pick up the WASP cookbook, which I'm absolutely in love with. That was something I got to do this last weekend. And while I was going around making my rounds and talking to all the WASP family, my dear friend Erin had the brilliant idea to get the family to sign the pages of their mom's or grandma's page because they are now their voice. So she had that one brilliant idea. So I was going around talking to all the WASP families and asking them to sign my book. So it's going in my collection. Actually, it's going in two collections, right? Because it's a cookbook and I have a cookbook collection, but I also have a collection of books that are geared around World War II in some way, shape, or form, and that I've had autographed by the author. And so this book is going to go in that area because I also had my friend who the cookbook was her idea. I got her signature in mine as well. So I was absolutely nerding out about it and talking to everybody that I could. And it was just a memorable weekend. And I'm always so humbled just listening to the stories of the World War II WASP. I'm humbled by how humbled they were, really. I mean, a lot of these women, and I find that with this greatest generation, they will come to you. Like if I go to a World War II vet, right, and I say, thank you for your service. He's like, hey, I did what I had to do. It was an honor to serve my country and I would do it again. 100% of the time, that's what they will say to me. And they said, we were needed. We answered the call. Boom. All across the board, whether you served or you were on the home front, every single person I talked to would say they needed me and I went. And these women were no different. They were needed. But it was also exciting because, women were already in aviation, but it was really thought of as more like a male career, right? It was a male area because we already had Amelia Earhart, who was amazing, right? With the 99s. And there were other women pilots too. And I could go on. I don't know their names off the top of my head. I'm sorry, I don't, but I have their faces in my head. And so there were already women pilots. And a lot of these women who answered the call already had flown numerous hours. And so women pilots were already existing, but not to this level for the military. So just like women going to be able to work in the factories, right, in war production and in areas that maybe they weren't able to go in before, such as taxi drivers, policemen, firefighters, you name it. And the doors opened for women, and it's no different than these women pilots who the doors open, they found a way to serve their country, and that's what they did. They signed up. They went to Sweetwater at their own expense, took these classes, and over 1,000 passed, and the rest is history. Amazing, amazing, amazing. I highly recommend, if you don't know the Women Airforce Service Pilots, look them up. Learn a lot. I mean, I know more in the files of my brain than what I'm telling you. I can't always find the right filing cabinets. And, I always tell myself I should probably research before I come on here, but I I just can't, there's just so much about these amazing women. So check them out. They're called the WASP, and you won't regret it. I also think that these women probably really motivated and inspired other women. I mean, I can only go by a hunch on that one, but I have a fun little story, and this correlates to my family, and my close friends already know this story, and I can't tell it enough because I just think it's really super neat. But my great aunt, after the war, you may all already know, but a lot of the planes were considered scrap, right? And civilians could actually buy these warplanes. They could buy warplanes. They could buy bombers, which is unbelievable to me. Or the planes were going to be scrapped. And my great aunt, she is my grandmother's aunt. So my great aunt, she never married, and she was living with some other women roommates at the time, which was very common back then. We'll definitely talk about that as well in future episodes. But her and her roommates actually pitched in together, bought a P-51 Mustang, and they took flying lessons to learn to fly it. Now, they ended up selling the plane because it just got too expensive. But without a doubt, I have no doubt that they were inspired by the WASP. And that's my little story on that one. So now we're going to ferry into, do you like that ferry? Get it? If F-E-R-R-Y, haha, like ferrying planes. Anyway, we are going to move into the very next thing that I thought we would talk about today. And this was something that was in the news, but it was also something that would happen during World War II, and yes, on the home front, and that is blackouts. So back in 1942, very early 1942, after the bombing of Pearl Harbor that happened December 7th, 1941, our country actually practiced blackouts. So we would do this because if everything was blacked out, somebody from above could not drop a bomb on you, or at least they wouldn't know where everybody lived because the lights would be out. So not knowing if we were going to have another attack, the country sent out ways for civilians to protect themselves by preparing for a blackout. And one of the ways they did this is they would send out information, right? You could see it in your newspaper. It went across the radio, but there were also civilian air raid wardens that were brought on and trained that would ensure that their neighborhood was fully blacked out. Now, some of the things that you could buy as a civilian in your neighborhood is they would have blackout curtains. They would also have blackout light bulbs. I will definitely show you one as I get video on this podcast. We'll definitely revisit this because I don't see me talking about one thing only once. There will be ways that I'm going to bring it up again, especially because I told you my grandparents are my biggest influence, and my grandmother was an air raid warden at the age of 14 right outside Chicago in one of the very near suburbs. And so she lived there at 14 years old. She was trained to be an air raid warden. They are also trained in first aid, and she would go around when the sirens went off to ensure her whole neighborhood was blacked out. Now, I did just mention the blackout light bulb, and it really looks like what you would buy now, like a blackout light bulb, right? It's that purple that where your black light would show. And what that enabled is, sorry, my dog is nudging me for some ear pets here, little ear scratchies. But what that would do is it would enable people to be able to see around their room, but obviously it was not bright enough to light up the whole room that would indicate to a plane flying over that this is a neighborhood, drop your bombs here. So they would do that as well. And they even had games out for kids or families. I've actually seen it called Blackout, which is a game that you can play during the blackout so you are not bored and to try to keep the fear at bay. I've also seen activities in magazines that you can do during blackout to keep your kids engaged and from not being scared. But it's crazy, right, to think about that. And the reason I was bringing this up is because, as we saw in the news recently, there was a blackout over in Europe. Now, how does this correlate? Well, it's just talking about really preparedness, right? I think at all times, something that you learn from the war, for wartime or the fear of war, is to be prepared. And I don't know how well you can be prepared if, let's say, you're on an elevator, other than you never take an elevator and you only take the stairs. But this has kind of brought the conversation back to the forefront here in my household, that ways that we can be prepared. Because an unprepared nation or whatever, right, or a country is exactly that and would be easy for, let's do World War II terms, invasion. So right away, I'm looking at my husband, I'm like, what do we need to do for power outages, even just a power outage in my neighborhood, which is oddly has been happening a lot to me lately. And so I'm, of course, like getting candles and I am getting batteries and flashlights, right? The normal thing. I ordered some headlamps. I even ordered some light bulbs that are battery operated that you literally put in your lamp. And while electricity is working, it works like a normal light bulb. But the second electricity goes out, your battery kicks on and you still have lights. So it was just something that was brought up that made me think about being prepared for anything. And that's kind of what I've been learning as I'm diving deeper and deeper into the World War II Homefront, whether I'm looking here, I'm here in the U.S. So of course I'm focused on the U.S. World War II Homefront, but it doesn't mean I don't learn something from across the pond. And watching their blackouts, they were unprepared and they couldn't get gas and they didn't have electricity and their internet went out. And so what would you do if that were to happen here? So I admit, diving into the World War II Homefront and seeing how my grandparents lived and understanding the skill set they had, it has actually helped me become, I guess, a bit of a prepper. I call myself a baby prepper. There are people out there that are prepped more than I could possibly hope to be, but I still consider myself a baby prepper. And so this blackout is just showing, how and during any time you need to be prepared. And during World War II, the Homefront was being prepared. And so I'll give you an example. If you remember my first episode, I talk about FDR, and I'm pretty sure I mentioned that he was being prepared even before we entered the war. He was being prepared. He knew that there was always a chance, right, of something happening, of us being brought into the war, even though we didn't want to be. And so he already had troops training in case we went to war. Thousands of troops. He had already done this. Now, was that enough troops for war? No. But he was being prepared. And if there's one thing we learn from that time, from any time in hardship, such as war, conveniences are gone. And I think that's the biggest thing you're going to see throughout my episodes as I try to live like the World War II Homefront of America, is that I am nixing a lot of conveniences. And so a lot of people will call it, they're like, well, that's a more simple life. Okay, simple life is not an easy life. I have a lot that I have to do. It is a lot of work. And being prepared is a lot of work. And yes, are you sometimes going to think, well, I may never use this. Hopefully I don't ever have to use something for a blackout, but I'm going to be prepared. And that is just another way to bring something that we have learned, right, from the World War II Homefront, is to be prepared. And they were already preparing back then. They were already bringing up some production because we were helping Britain. We were helping our allies. FDR had already had troops training. We were already in locations such as Greenland, right, to be closer to the conflict. I don't think we ever guessed that it was going to be fought from both coasts. I think that definitely took us by surprise. But again, this is something that I've learned from the Homefront, that I've been inspired by the Homefront. Could I have learned from somewhere else? Sure. But because I have such a love for this time in our history, it makes sense that this has inspired me to be more prepared for situations. And so seeing that blackout on the news is telling me I need to be prepared for no electricity. And so this is something that I'm building up. And I wanted to share that with you all because we can learn from that, right? Now, I could probably go more on about things that happening in current day, but this is not really that type of podcast for it, at least not at this time. I really want to just keep the focus around World War II, but I think it will start conversations or has already started conversations. And, any conversation that you can learn something from is a good conversation. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is time for this episode to come to a close. If you have bared with me for this entire episode, thank you, thank you, thank you. I love you for hanging in there with me. And yes, please sure to hit that subscribe button, share it with your friends and family, anybody that you think might enjoy this podcast. And I know this is new, I'm still looking to get my groove, but I'm in this for the duration. I want you in this for the duration. We are going to have great conversations together, and I'm going to be having special guests on in the future where we will be going live on discussions, but I am not going to drop that bomb just yet. We are going to leave that as a cliffhanger. So I will have more information for you in future podcasts. And until next time, everybody, have a great day.